This is Michael Popok, so it must be Legal AF After Dark. We got plenty of time to talk about Judge Merchan and his sentencing of Donald Trump for 34 felony counts in New York on July 11th, just in time for Donald Trump to accept the Republican nomination in Milwaukee. Hard to believe. There's a lot that goes into sentencing in New York, a lot of inputs from the probation department, from the prosecutors, from the defense, and then Judge Merchan has to mete out justice the way that he sees fit. Will there be incarceration? Will there be fines? Will there be community service? Let me talk to you about it with my colleague, former prosecutor in the Manhattan DA's office, Karen Friedman-Knifler. Take a listen. We've got, as I laid out before, we've got several dates coming up. Tomorrow, and then Ben and I will be able to talk about it on Saturday, we've got the defense filing their proposal for sentencing. I'm laughing because we can only imagine what that's going to say. Some version of election interference, lawlessness, witch hunt. He shouldn't have been convicted at all. Reversible error. We're going to win on appeal. Don't sentence yet. First Amendment rights, whatever. And they'll sign that. Karen, you'll give your own comments about what they're going to ask for. Whatever it's going to be, it's not going to be jail time. And it's not going to be any kind of confinement. It will go from there. And then on the other side, you got your old office. And I can say this easier than you can because I wasn't in the office. I have always considered, I think I told you this in another podcast, I've always considered the Manhattan DA, before I even met you, to be the elite of the elite, and not just in New York. In fact, when I was building my own trial team at a financial services firm, in recruiting, I told people that what I wanted to do was to model my office after what Morgenthau had done in building an elite trial squadron, of which you were a big part. And we were going to do this in my financial services firm. And that was the type of best and brightest that I was looking for in my hiring. And I only used, not the U.S. Attorney's Office, I only used the Manhattan DA as my template and my role model for that kind of building. So you're not wrong, at least in not my view, about that's not a step down or a step up. I mean, they are, if you're looking for the creme de la creme plum position in New York as a prosecutor team, you can't go any higher or better than that DA's office. On the sentencing, you got your old office trying to cook up what they're going to put together for their recommendation. And I want to hear from you, of course, on that. You've been involved with many of those sentencing memos. And as they try to get that information into the judge who makes the ultimate decision, you've got victims, if there are victims of the crime, and here the entire electorate was the victim of the crime. And so I'm not sure there's a victim impact statement, but there might be some analysis in the probation department and what they did. And they did their interview, and it was 30 minutes long. And it was at Mar-a-Lago, at least by video. And Todd Blanche was allowed to be there for Donald Trump, which is slightly unusual, but he was there. And apparently, we got some new information that came out of there about Donald Trump and a missing gun. Why don't you take it from there? Talk about your old office and what do you think they're going through now to get together their recommendations for the 27th of June, the sentencing process, which we can touch on again, and then we can turn back to this interview, including the missing gun and what it means for Donald Trump potentially and his conditions of release around the country.
It's interesting. I go back and forth when I think about what is the prosecution going to do, and are they going to ask for jail or not? And I say that because one of the things I've done the most in my career is sat with groups of prosecutors and gone over what do we think we should recommend for sentence in a particular case. And it's a hard thing to do, right? It's not an easy it's not an easy thing to determine, and a lot goes into the decision making. And I could see, for example, different people on the team having different opinions, right? There were 4 or 5 lawyers on this team. Alvin Bragg will have the ultimate say. And they will take lots of things into consideration. They'll look at, the first thing they do is they start with what is the range of possibilities. And here the range gives the judge a lot of discretion. It could be each count carries a sentence of 1 1/3 to 4 years. And that's at the top end. Some of them, they can all run back to back to back. They call that consecutive, to make a total of 20 years at the top instead of the top being 4 years, because it's an E felony. So 20 is the max they could run them all, string them all together. And so the way 1 1/3 to 4 works means that he would be sentenced to, he'd have to serve 1 1/3 years after a 1 1/3, I guess 1 year and 3 months, he would be eligible for release. But the jail or the prison can hold him up to 4 years, depending on how he does while he's in. With, I think, 7/8, he does 7/8 of the time, with an eighth shaved off for good time. And so that's what it would be on the top end of what you're looking at. And at the bottom end, they could do anything. They could do a conditional discharge, which means essentially nothing other than certain conditions like community service, or stay out of trouble, or don't try to steal any other elections. That literally, you can make a condition anything. You could make it truly, I think I've said this before. I had one once where a defendant was sentenced to military service because that's what he wanted. He wanted to go into the military, and said, make that my sentence so that I actually follow through with it. That's why I want you to be lenient and not put me in jail, so I can go on with my life and do something productive. And you have a lot of latitude. They could put him on probation. He could be fined. I think a fine is the least likely thing they would recommend, because he's a billionaire, or certainly at least has access to a lot of money, because he fundraises hundreds of millions of dollars off of these cases. So I would say that's not really punishment for someone like him. What would be punishment and a deterrent? And so they're going to be looking at all those things. If I were them, I probably wouldn't even want probation supervision, because that's just, what's he going to do? Report to a kiosk? And, that's just sort of a strange, especially given who he is and what he might be doing next year. So I think what really the big question they're thinking about is whether it's going to be, whether they're going to recommend some form of incarceration. And I lean towards yes. I think they will recommend it. Because that's a true punishment here. The other true punishment, I would say, would be a conditional discharge with lots of community service, but the type of community service where you pick up trash on the subway. That would be, I think, a huge punishment that could be appropriate. But jail could take a lot of forms, right? It doesn't have to be 1 1/3 to 4. It could be weekends. They could make them serve weekends in jail. So you show up on sometimes it's like Saturday morning, and you spend the day in jail, and you spend the night Saturday night, and you spend all day Sunday, and you're released Sunday afternoon. Make them do a month of weekends. Or they could do home confinement. Those are the types of things that I think they're thinking about. And I've said this before, if his name wasn't Donald John Trump, they would recommend the maximum. I mean, this is a guy who has he was arrested, and then he had 3 other pending, currently open indictments in both state and federal court. I mean, he actually stole an election. The jury had to find beyond a reasonable doubt that this was about stealing the election. This was about election interference. And the fact that I'm sure they will argue, because they argued in summation, that Donald Trump won this election very narrowly in 3 swing states by 80,000 votes. That's what made the difference. 80,000 people, 80,000 votes. That's what made him win the 2016 election and made him the 45th president of the United States. And what if this was the information that, if this had come out, this would have put the people in the swing states over the edge into the other camp? This was MAGA cult insanity, where you've got these diehard, I don't care what he does. He could be adjudicated a rapist, which he is. He could be a convicted felon, which he is. This was pre that time. This was still game show host, or whatever he was, reality show or beauty pageant show host, whatever shows he had, clown Trump. with the weird hair, who had that Access Hollywood tape come out, and people were like, "What the heck is going on here?" And you heard people at the trial testify that was crushing, right? That was a very difficult time, and they were desperate for this not to come out. And so, that could have made the difference. So I say all that because I can make the argument, and I think the prosecutors will ultimately, because if you're going to do it with a straight face and you're going to treat them like any other defendant, there is no more serious Class E felony that exists. There just isn't. This is one of it's the most serious Class E felony I've ever certainly seen. I've never seen one where the defendant and then committed this crime. He wrote these checks. He did all this while he was the 45th president of the United States of America. I mean, to me, it's atrocious. He deserves prison. And if he wasn't Donald Trump, let's just be honest, they would recommend prison. And so the question is whether they will recommend that he be treated like everybody else, or will they take something else into consideration? And that's something, but I would argue that's the judge's job. That let the prosecution argue what they're going to argue, let the defense say, whatever they're going to say, and it's up to the judge to strike the balance. So that's where I land in terms of the sentence.
Yeah, and then Donald Trump's got another problem, because in just the 30 minutes of his interview, when he got to the point when he said, do you have any guns, any firearms? Now, we were all shocked, although I should have remembered, because back in March, Donald Trump turned in 2, apparently, of his firearms. He had 3 under a concealed weapons permit that he held in New York, which was a scary thought. But then the question was, well, where's the 3rd one? Because he turned in 2, not because he was being a nice guy, but because as a condition of his release, law enforcement and judges don't generally like to have the person who is a criminal defendant facing felonies to have firearms in case there has to be the execution of a search warrant in the future. They have to be picked up for bond or bail violation or anything like that. It's a good rule. And where that hasn't happened, or where a indicted defendant has illegally obtained or retained his firearms or her firearms, bad things have happened to law enforcement. And so it's not a joke. And Donald Trump turned in 2, and it came up in the interview while he was in Florida that he's got a 3rd one, but it's in Florida, in Mar-a-Lago. And his spokespeople came out with, "Oh, don't worry, it's all properly being retained." Well, none of it's being properly retained by Donald Trump. He is not allowed to possess or own a firearm unless he sold that firearm off to somebody else, and that's for another day. Now, the town of Palm Beach's, I was at Sheriff's Department, police department, when they were reached for comment, said, we're going to have to look into that. In other words, police departments that generally regulate firearms in a community, including concealed weapons permits, if that's appropriate. Florida got rid of and scrapped their concealed weapons permit requirement about a year ago under DeSantis, meaning you don't have to have one. You can just own a gun outright, and don't have any other requirements under their view of the Second Amendment, which is also scary, because I've had my concealed weapons permit, and you learn how to properly and safely use firearms, and you learn how to store them, and you learn how to keep them away from children, and as a requirement, and you register and you background check. It's a good thing. It's not a good thing when you don't know who's got weapons in your community, especially if you're on the law enforcement side. And so Donald Trump just was like, well, I guess I'm in the land of DeSantis. I can just do whatever I want, except you can't. And we're not talking about the felony conviction, losing your right, even under the Second Amendment, to have a gun. We're talking about he is still subject to conditions of release in 4 separate criminal proceedings, including the convicted one in New York, Georgia, D.C., Florida, and New York. And so he can't have a gun for any of them. And so this missing gun is not just a small deal, it's potentially a big deal. While the New York Police Department is going to be revoking his concealed weapons permit, they've already announced that. There's no way around it. There's no former president convicted felon exception pending appeal. You lose your guns. And so and you lose your right to carry a concealed weapon. And then similarly, this is a different issue, which is, has he violated the conditions of his release? And we're going to continue to follow it. And all the prosecutors are going to have to now open up a new file about the missing gun and exactly what was disclosed. Now, we weren't on that phone call, of course, and there's been some reporting about it. So we'll have to make sure that we think it's been corroborated, and that's actually what happened. There's already been statements by the Trump side about it. Welcome back. Now you know why we named it 4 years ago Legal AF. We sit at the intersection of law and politics, so you don't have to, and curate the top stories at that intersection. You like lawyers talking about things, they know what they're talking about. You've come to the right place. Legal AF. Wednesdays, Saturdays, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on this YouTube channel. Free subscribe and help MeidasTouch get to 3 million free subscribers. We're building this network with our bare hands with your help. No outside advisors. Nobody censors our content. Nobody tells me what to say or anybody else that's on this network. No smoke or sunshine is blown. So if you know about Legal AF and you know about that clip already, we really appreciate you. Take the time. Send it off to people in your life and ask them to become part of our audience. And if you don't know about us, it's possible. We appreciate you. Invite you to join us Wednesdays, Saturdays, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and then on audio podcast platforms of your choice. So until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting. Heary, heary, Legal AF Law Breakdown is now in session. Go beyond the headlines and get a deep dive into the important legal concepts you need to know, and we discuss every day on Legal AF. Exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, all for the price of a couple of cups of coffee. Join us at patreon.com/legalaf. That's patreon.com/legalaf.